Freedom is not a reaction. Freedom is not a choice. It is the state of being where there is no fear.
There is a kind of quiet grief that doesn't leave a trace in photographs, and it doesn't show up like the loss of an object or a loved one. It's like a shadow moving in the corners of your daily routine, an invisible weight that appears exactly when everything seems to be, finally, falling into place. You feel like something is ending, but you can't point to a culprit, and this soft melancholy starts whispering that you're losing your ground, while the rest of the world insists you should be celebrating the view from the top. Maybe you don't know it yet, but this discomfort is the first clue that the structure that held your whole life together until now has secretly started to crumble from within. Have you ever noticed how some pains feel safer than the very peace you've been chasing for so long? We've become masters at surviving chaos and at carrying the weight of the struggle like it's a badge of honor. But we rarely ask what's left of us when the war finally ends. The nervous system doesn't recognize freedom as an immediate gift. It sees it as a threat to its old way of existing. If you feel like your clarity has vanished and your motivation has evaporated, you aren't failing. You're just starting to cross the most dangerous gateway of the soul, where the armor that saved you for decades has now become your own prison. Most people give up exactly at this point, confusing the neutrality of the emptiness with a fall into the abyss of depression, without realizing that the silence is just the sound of the gears of your identity stopping. There's a secret no one told you about the act of letting go. Before you feel the lightness, you will feel the loneliness of someone who no longer knows what role they're supposed to play. Your mind will desperately try to create a new problem to solve, just so you can feel useful again. But every attempt to step in right now will only serve to delay the only revelation that truly matters. It's a high-stakes psychological game where the only way to win is to refuse to fight against what is leaving. Right at this moment, parts of you are shutting down, like lights in a city preparing for a long winter night. You find yourself missing versions of yourself that were unhappy, but predictable, and this nostalgia without a memory is the last chain of an identity resisting its own end. What would happen if you stopped trying to fix what isn't broken, but is simply ending? What would happen if you discovered that the strength you always believed you had was just the noise of a tension that was never meant to be yours? We are about to go down into the layers where effort becomes irrelevant and true stability begins to emerge from nothing. Prepare your spirit for what's about to be revealed. Because freedom isn't the addition of something new, it's the absolute absence of what was too heavy to carry forward. If you've made it this far, feeling like something is changing, but you're not sure what, know that the weight you're carrying tightens its grip right before it disappears forever. Don't skip a single chapter of this journey, because what we're about to uncover are the 10 final passages that separate your old self from the clarity that flows without effort. The time for survival is over, and what remains when the weight drops without warning is the only truth you can never lose. The grief that's living in your chest right now is the sound of an ancient structure collapsing in absolute silence. You look at your life and everything seems intact, but inside, the walls of that identity you built with so much sweat have started to peel. It's a sadness that doesn't fit common names, a melancholy that isn't born from a mistake, but from an inevitable transition. You feel like you're losing something, but what's leaving isn't your future. It's just the past losing its usefulness. The mind, trained for danger, sees this dissolution as a failure, as if you were sliding back into a state of helplessness. However, what you call a loss is actually the deepest evidence that something real is finally changing. You organized yourself around the struggle, and now that the weight is starting to give way, you feel strangely orphaned. It's confusing to notice that some things in your life are improving, while your inner self feels heavier and more directionless by the day. This gravity isn't a sign of depression. It's the sacred weight of a skin that is being shed. Where there used to be the constant noise of survival, there's now a void that your mind tries to fill with anxiety. Maybe freedom feels scary because it doesn't come with a script, and you spent your whole life reading the manual on how not to fall apart. Don't try to fix this sadness through action. This grief doesn't want to be repaired. It wants space so that the death of the old self can be properly honored. Familiarity creates a twisted comfort that makes us prefer a known pain over an unknown peace. You know who you are when you're under pressure. But who are you when there's nothing to carry? That question sends a chill through your spine that the mind tries to hide with new obligations. Your nervous system learned that being on high alert means being safe, and now it sees relaxation as a dangerous vulnerability. You find yourself looking for problems that were already solved, just to get back that intensity that made you feel alive. It's an emotional addiction to the adrenaline of effort, a dependency on an identity that only feels valid through sacrifice. Giving up the fight feels like an act of betrayal against everything you've endured until now. But the truth is that the armor that protected you on the battlefield is now the very thing stopping you from breathing in the garden. As the emotional detox moves forward, you enter a phase of neutrality that feels like a no man's land. Old passions lose their flavor, and you walk through life as if you were under a deep anesthesia. What's happening is a process of recalibration, where the circuits of excess are being shut down. Your system is learning how to function without the fuel of urgency. And this transition requires a passivity that our culture hates. You feel tired for no reason, but this fatigue is the rest needed for the soul to reorganize itself. The inner silence is pushing out the noise of other people's expectations that you internalized. There's nothing wrong with feeling empty, because emptiness is the womb of creation. If you try to fill this space too soon, you'll interrupt the birth of your new self. The final break happens when you realize that the role of the survivor is no longer needed. Letting that character die is like watching a fire consume your house while you stand on the sidewalk. There's a sharp pain in the loss of your self-image. But what's being destroyed is only the belief that your worth is tied to your usefulness. You spent years justifying your space in the world through effort, and now life is inviting you to just be. This simplicity is the hardest thing to accept for a mind trained in the struggle. You feel exposed, but it's in this state of unprotected openness that true strength begins to show itself. It's not the strength that pushes, but the strength that remains. The weight falls not because you decided to let go, but because you stopped holding on so tightly out of fear. This freedom that's creeping in feels empty before it feels light, because you're still looking for the burden that used to define you. Your body still holds the posture of someone carrying weight, and your mind still scans the horizon for ghost threats. It takes time for the nervous system to understand that the absence of a fight doesn't mean danger. Lightness comes bit by bit, like the morning light hitting the treetops before it reaches the forest floor. You start to notice that decisions flow without the torment of doubt, and the desire to prove something to someone simply dissolves into irrelevance. The clarity that emerges isn't an answer to all your questions. It's the dissolution of the questions that were born from your insecurity. The weight dropped without warning because its time in your life expired. You crossed the border into a territory where effort has no currency and where peace is the only law that governs movement. What you're feeling now is the stabilization of a new frequency, where existing is no longer a task, but a dance to be watched. The journey didn't turn you into someone else. It just removed everything that was stopping you from being who you've always been. You're standing on the edge of a new way of walking, where every step is taken not to get somewhere, but because the ground beneath your feet is finally worth trusting. The mystery that used to scare you has become the home that welcomes you. Everything that was heavy stayed behind because it was no longer needed. You are here, whole, raw, and finally free. What you're holding now isn't the weight of the world anymore, but the echo of a silence you've avoided your whole life. Reaching this point in the crossing, the shores of who you used to be have become so distant that it's no longer possible to tell where your pain ended and your identity began. The great irony of human existence is that we spend decades trying to build fortresses, only to discover that our true essence is whatever is left when the walls finally come down. You weren't destroyed by the process. You were simply revealed. Look at your hands and feel the space between your fingers, because that's where the control slipped away, to make room for a trust that doesn't need any proof. If at any point in the next few days you feel that old urge to overwork yourself, close your eyes and remember the vastness you experienced here. Freedom is a muscle that gets stronger in the quiet, not in the noise. That small voice that used to scream for help has now become a whisper of someone who understands that life doesn't happen to you. It happens through you. The scars of the struggle aren't marks of defeat. They are the map of a territory you no longer need to live in. What used to be a burden has turned into wisdom, and what was exhaustion has transformed into a presence that is enough on its own. The truth hidden under all the layers of simplicity is that you never needed to be more than you are to be worthy of the air you breathe. All the exhaustion you carried was the price you paid to keep an image alive that was never your true face. Now that the weight has dropped without warning, what remains is a stability that doesn't depend on outside circumstances, a peace that doesn't ask for permission to exist. You are walking on new ground, where every step is a confirmation that the universe trusts your ability to simply be. There's nowhere to run. When you finally realize you've already arrived at the home you were looking for in every lost battle. May this frequency we've established today keep vibrating in every quiet choice you make from now on. There is a sacred beauty in letting the old die so that the eternal can bloom, and you are both the master and the masterpiece of this transformation. The journey we took together doesn't end when this screen goes dark. It starts over every time you choose lightness over the burden and truth over the mask. The greatest act of courage you can show right now is to not rebuild what life, in its infinite mercy, decided to tear down. Just stay, observe, and let the light heal what the effort was only covering up. If your heart felt the impact of this truth, and if something deep woke up under the layers of your routine, don't let this moment get lost in the noise of the world. Leaving a sign of your presence here is more than just a technical gesture. It's an act of anchoring, a quiet commitment to your own evolution. By liking this video, by subscribing to keep this connection alive, and by sharing this message, you help expand this field of consciousness where healing is possible. Leave a comment with the phrase that seals your new commitment: I trust the flow. By writing those 4 words, You're declaring to your subconscious that the war is over and that peace is now your only guide. This is the moment your new life starts to breathe on its own. Move forward with the certainty that lightness isn't an achievement, but your natural state recovered. The mystery that brought us together here continues to guide your steps. Always remember, you aren't becoming less. You are simply becoming free.